Hello and welcome to the Sunshine Cathedral. The Sunshine Cathedral is a different kind of church where the past is past and the future has infinite possibilities. And with that, we invite you to come and worship with us here on Sunday mornings at 9 and 10:30 a.m. at 1480 Southwest 9th Avenue. Now, I invite you to come in and worship with us here at the Sunshine Cathedral.
Our first reading is from Robert Holden's Happiness Now. Like a fragrance to a flower, true happiness is an expression of your unconditional self, the real you. True happiness is very attractive in that it literally attracts great things. Happiness encourages trust, spontaneity, optimism, and enthusiasm, all of which bring great gifts. In particular, when you dare to be happy, you find that people instinctively gravitate to you and like you, although they may not know why. Maybe it's something to do with your smile. Whatever it is, your happiness is an inspiration and a gift to everyone. Everyone benefits from true happiness. Everyone benefits from your happiness. No matter how low, hurt, hopeless, fearful, or how awful you feel, the potential to experience peace and happiness never goes away. Just as clouds in the sky can eclipse the sun but not destroy it, so too can fear and pain eclipse your happiness but not destroy it. The potential for happiness is with you permanently. In these human words, God's voice is heard.
God is with you. And also with you. A reading from the Gospel according to Luke. Glory to you, Lord Christ. Now, that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them. Jesus asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you only a visitor to Jerusalem and do not know the things that have happened there in these days?" "What things?" he asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed, before God and all the people. The chief priest and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hope that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see." As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus acted as if he were going farther. But they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road?" They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them assembled together and saying, "It is true, the Lord has risen and appeared to Simon." Then the two told what happened on their way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. This is the gospel, the good news.
And happy Star Wars Day. Y'all, you look a little confused. Today's date is May the 4th. So may the 4th be with you. Okay. I know it's bad. It has nothing to do with the message this morning, but I heard it this past week, and I just had to share that. Just a few minutes ago, we heard one of the very longest gospel readings of the year. Thank you, Deacon Ed. That was a long one. But I understand and I can see why it was so long, because it's really a great story. There's so much that we can take from it. There's a lot of depth, and there's a lot of meaning in that message. What we heard is another narrative of an Easter appearance by Jesus. Now, leading up to Easter, we hear so much about Jesus and about his ministry. And then after Easter, we hear other stories, mostly about people's experiences of Jesus' resurrection, how they continued to encounter Jesus even after his execution. And when we think of the stories that Jesus shared, I would guess that many of us, myself included, go right to the parables. The parable of the Good Samaritan, the parable of the prodigal child, the parable of the lost coin. There are so many of these wonderful parables, fictional stories that Jesus told, and he shared them with his followers so that they, and now us, could learn a theological or a moral lesson. And we learn from these stories that we are to reach out and to show kindness to all people. We learn that our God will always welcome us, even when we have strayed or when we've moved away from goodness. And we've learned that when we are lost, God will always search for us and will continue to search for us until we are found. The contemporary biblical scholar John Dominic Crossan has written that not only are there parables which Jesus shared with his followers, but the gospel writers took that idea of creating parables to teach a lesson. They took that idea from Jesus and have included the same style, that same parable format in their writings. The gospel writers created parables about Jesus. For example, the factual account of Jesus' crucifixion, which is most likely historically true and that we heard about on Good Friday, has created various and probably fictional writings on the meaning of his crucifixion, of how Jesus' life and his actions can bring meaning to each of us, even after his death. And the gospel lesson that we heard this morning is just one such example of a parable, not from Jesus, but about Jesus. And in this story, this parable, we meet up with two travelers. One is known as Cleopas, and the other is unnamed. So who is this Cleopas person? He's not somebody that you hear much about in the New Testament or in the gospel writings. Scholars have identified him as the disciple of Jesus, who is most likely the same person mentioned in the crucifixion narrative taken from John's Gospel, chapter 19, verse 25. And it says, "Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene." So it seems that Cleopas and Clopas are probably the same person, just different spellings, the difference between the Aramaic and the Greek names. And we also know from our studies and from other sermons that Reverend Durrell has preached that when there is an unnamed person in the biblical story, frequently that unnamed person is probably a woman. So it's quite possible that the unnamed traveler with Cleopas is Mrs. Cleopas. Now, those are, of course, the best guesses from biblical scholars who are far more well-read than I am. But I like the fact that in this story, one of the travelers is unnamed because it gives each of us the opportunity to put ourselves in that story. We can imagine ourselves walking a road, leaving some place behind because something really awful has happened, something we didn't expect, something that we had hoped for which didn't occur in the way that we had anticipated. And I would suspect that many of us have done exactly that. And I have to imagine that is how the two travelers felt that day as they left Jerusalem. Now I have a language lesson for all of you. The word Jerusalem in the Hebrew language means peace or shalom. And I'm quite certain that Jerusalem felt anything but peaceful to those two travelers after the upsetting events of the past 3 days. And according to this story, they were traveling to a place called Emmaus, which translates to a warm bath. I kind of like that. So quite possibly the travelers were headed to a place that had hot springs available, hot springs that would be used for healing. These two travelers, these two followers of Jesus, were traveling from a very non-peaceful Jerusalem to a place of warmth and a place of healing, Emmaus. And while on this journey towards possible healing, the two travelers meet a stranger, someone that they didn't recognize at all. And it's kind of interesting to me that they didn't recognize Jesus. Did Jesus change form? Were they kept from recognizing him? We really don't know that. Why didn't the travelers recognize him? In my research for this message, one biblical scholar suggested that the two travelers had the sun in their eyes so that they couldn't recognize Jesus. And it sounds to me like that scholar's kind of grabbing at straws with that one. But the two travelers were very willing to share their story of hurt and of disappointment with someone they thought of as a stranger. They shared their story of expectations that were unfulfilled, expectations that had gone awry. And how often have we shared our tale of woe with total strangers? Or how often have we had people that we don't know talk with us about the troubles in their lives? It's actually fairly common to do that. Most people just simply want someone to listen, someone to hear our story. And think about the journey of Cleopas and the unnamed traveler for just a moment. They had put all of their hopes and all of their expectations on Jesus, and they were ultimately disappointed. I think the saddest words in that whole gospel lesson are, "We had hoped." We had hoped that Jesus would be the one to save us from Roman rule. We had hoped he would welcome us and that he would invite us to recognize our sacred value. We had hoped that he would be the one to redeem Israel, but he was crucified. He was crucified right in front of us, crucified like a common criminal. We had hoped. It can be really tough, really difficult to hope sometimes. It can be really difficult to hope that things will get better. It can be really difficult to hope that we will find the best job for ourselves, or the best partner, or the best cure for what ails us, or that we will find the best place for us to be ourselves. Human hope is a very, very fragile thing. When it withers and when it dies, it can be extremely challenging to bring hope back to our lives. But where there is life, there must be hope. And that is what I believe the two travelers were doing that day. They were going to a place that would revive their hope, that would heal them, that would make them feel alive again. I've shared with this congregation a number of times that I grew up in a very small town in northwestern Pennsylvania. Our family was quite active in the local Presbyterian church because there really wasn't much else to do. And in such small towns, church activities are often quite important. They bring family and friends together. It's an outlet. It's a way of building community with each other. And I always enjoyed attending church, though the worship services kind of struck me as dry and kind of dull. And let's face it, they were kind of boring. But I felt a warmth, and I felt a comfort in church that I didn't feel anywhere else. And I also felt at a fairly early age a call to ordained ministry, but I wasn't real sure of what to do with that, though I was quite certain I didn't want to work in such a small town church. So when I moved to South Florida almost 18 years ago, one of the first things I wanted to do was to find a church that would fit me. And I thought it would be easy. South Florida is so large compared to my small hometown of 1,500 people. I had hoped that I could move down here and find a church community that would fit, one that would welcome me for all of who I am, and one that would recognize my sacred value. I had hoped. My sister Kathy lives up in Boca Raton, so I enlisted her help in finding this really wonderful church that I had dreamed of, this church that would welcome me and encourage me and celebrate my life. Well, it wasn't nearly as easy as I had anticipated. Since I grew up in the Presbyterian church, I tried several churches in the Presbyterian denomination. And, well, we found churches that kind of looked like the church I came from. The average age of the congregants was about 285, and there was no programming, there was no outreach of any kind. And we found churches that were so highly conservative that we walked out before the worship service really began. It was not exactly the warm, fuzzy church experience I was hoping for. And I really felt like I was at a loss. What was I going to do? I had tried several other faith communities, but nothing felt right. I wanted church, and I felt called to serve in the church, but I couldn't find anything. I had hoped it would be easy to find a church that fit. I had hoped. But it didn't happen, at least not for a little while. And it was during this time while I was looking for a place to call my church home that I really began to question myself. Was I asking for too much? Is there a place for me to belong as an out lesbian who identifies as a Christian? Does God really want me in ministry? Does God really love me? Am I worthy? That was really a tough time for me. But in retrospect, it was part of my journey. It was part of my Emmaus journey. And like those travelers, of course, I shared my story. I shared my story with strangers, and I shared my hopes with just a few people. I allowed myself to be vulnerable because truly at that point, I didn't have much to lose. Author and sociologist Brené Brown writes, "If we want greater clarity in our purpose or deeper and more meaningful spiritual lives, vulnerability is the path." Yes, we are totally exposed when we are vulnerable. And yes, we're taking a huge emotional risk when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable. But my friends, when we give ourselves permission to announce to others or even to ourselves, "I'm hurting," "I don't know what to do," or "I had hoped," we can be open to the presence of the Spirit of God in our lives. When we are vulnerable, a part of us can crack open, a part of ourselves that allows light and joy and even hope to enter into our lives. When we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we can see the power and the possibilities of new beginnings and of new paths. We can experience the power of transformation and the power of resurrection again and again. We can experience new life, and we can feel hope. Maybe when we haven't felt hopeful in a very long time. In our first reading this morning, we heard from Robert Holden, who tells us, no matter how low, hurt, hopeless, fearful, or how awful you feel, the potential to experience peace and happiness never goes away. We all have an Emmaus journey, every one of us. If you're here at Sunshine Cathedral, you have a story to tell of finding this church. And if you're watching us via the internet, you have a story of how you found a church, even online, that affirms the sacred value of all people. And many of us have several Emmaus journeys. If you identify as lesbian or gay, or if you identify as bisexual or transgendered, or if you are questioning, you've had an Emmaus journey. If you are a straight ally of the queer community, you've had an Emmaus journey. If you are part of a recovery program or in any kind of a self-help program, you've had an Emmaus journey. We've all had these journeys, every one of us, a journey in which we were vulnerable and a journey in which we had hoped. Almost 17 years ago now, I finally found Sunshine Cathedral. I found a church that would welcome me for all of who I am. And when I came into the doors of Sunshine Cathedral and when I witnessed the open communion table, I felt myself break open like the bread that is served during that sacred meal. I felt those very vulnerable places in my life fill with joy and fill with welcome. That day, my eyes opened and I recognized the presence of the Spirit moving in my life. I felt transformation, and I felt the resurrection of all that I had hoped for. And it was much, much more than I ever could have anticipated. When our hopes are diminished, when it all seems just too difficult, it can be very easy to get stuck, very easy to become comfortable in our disappointment and complacent in our actions. But what we need to remember is that Easter and the resurrection and possibilities for new beginnings, it doesn't always happen quickly. It doesn't always happen in just 3 days. Sometimes when that stone is blocking our path, we need to sit for just a while. We need to wait for a while. We need to allow ourselves to feel just a little bit broken and a little bit vulnerable. But then, we can be reminded of those two travelers who, when they recognized Jesus in the breaking of the bread, they ran back to tell their friends the good news. Resurrection can happen. Positive change can happen. Our hopes can be renewed. It is in these very vulnerable moments of allowing ourselves to be broke open that we can experience the resurrection of our buried hopes. When we allow hope to rise in our lives, the stone that seals our hearts and our dreams can be rolled away and allow in the light of promises and of new beginnings. My friends, remember, hold on. Pain ends. And know that the past is indeed the past, and the future, our future, has infinite new possibilities. And this is the good news. Amen. But I can hear and kind of feel what all of you are thinking. Jeanne, it's great. It's great to hope. I would love to feel that way. But it's not easy. It's never easy. We expect, when we put ourselves out there, that things are going to happen for us. And sometimes we have to wait. And sometimes we have to be vulnerable. We have to allow ourselves to be vulnerable so that we can become aware of the goodness that is around us.
Jesus, according to the tradition, gathered with friends to share a meal in the midst of difficulty, as if to demonstrate that optimism is always available no matter what is going on, no matter what is happening, no matter how bleak things look. And so gathered with people, he demonstrates that when we gather together, when we share what we have, when we eat a meal, no matter what we are doing, we can experience the presence of God, because there's not a spot where God is not. And so Jesus, after that meal, took a piece of leftover bread and blessed it by giving thanks, because gratitude is the best way to bless anyone or anything. And then he broke the bread, as if to say, when you are feeling broken, remember there is divine wholeness beyond that experience. He said, take and eat and remember. And then he took Elijah's cup and he blessed it and he offered it to everyone, leaving no one out, saying, drink all of this, all of you. This is a cup of a new and everlasting covenant, a covenant that includes all people. And whenever you drink this, remember. Holy One, we give thanks that at this table you are reminding us of our oneness with you and with one another. And so we give thanks for this, and we allow these simple elements, these simple symbols, to remind us of the profound truth that wherever we are, you are, and all is well. Amen. Sunshine Cathedral, we practice an open communion. And what that means is you don't have to be a member of this church or any church to receive the sacrament, just as you are. With whatever your beliefs or doubts may be, you are welcome to participate in this feast of unconditional love. My friends, these are the gifts of God for all the people of God.
Hello, I want to thank you for joining us for worship today here at the Sunshine Cathedral. Again, if you're ever in the Fort Lauderdale area, please stop by and worship with us on Sundays at 9 and 10:30 a.m. If you'd like to find out more about the Sunshine Cathedral, or about our resources, or about our books published by our senior pastor, the Reverend Dr. Darrell Watkins, or if you'd like to make a donation to the Sunshine Cathedral, please visit us at www.sunshinecathedral.org. Until the next time, may God continue to richly bless you on your journey.
I have seen